In this lab, we're going to discover density and how that affects the layers of the earth by modeling layers in a jar. The first material we're going to use is topsoil. Now, in order to find the density of topsoil or any other substance, we need to know its volume, in this case in milliliters, and its mass, in this case in grams. So I've measured it out. You can see that it is 100 milliliters. You measure out volume by using a measuring cup or a beaker or something that tells you how much it is, because volume is the amount of space it takes up. Here I have measured 100 milliliters of soil. In order to find the mass, we're going to use a scale. So we're going to turn on our scale, zero it out so that it says 0. And then we're going to measure our topsoil. Our topsoil is 35. So on your chart, you can write the volume is 100 milliliters and the mass is 35 grams. We're going to take that layer, put it into our jar. Some observations about this layer is what state of matter is it? Is it a solid, a liquid, or a gas? You can write down that observation. Another observation you can make is the particle size. These are the substances we're going to use. Here is the topsoil. It's got little teeny tiny particles and it's got a lot of bigger particles. The teeny tinier particles might be about the size of a grain of sand. The bigger particles might be about the size of, maybe that's like a pencil eraser size, maybe that's a paperclip size. So you can tell me about the size of the particles as well. You can see right here, we've got some that are maybe a millimeter wide and some that are, let's see, a couple millimeters, maybe 4 by half of a centimeter, I mean. So those are observations that you can write down. Okay, let's do our next substance. Our next substance is sand. We have some sand, and you can see that I have also measured out the volume is 100 milliliters. Again, to get the mass, we're going to zero out again our scale and measure that sand. The sand is 121 grams according to the scale. So the volume was 100 milliliters and the mass is 121 grams. For observations, what state of matter is sand? Is it a solid, a liquid, or a gas? And you can also write down the size of the particles. What are the size of the particles? It looks like each grain of sand, the biggest grain of sand I can see is maybe that one right there is the biggest, and there's only one of them, and it's maybe 2 millimeters. So sand is rather small, even smaller than our topsoil was. It's got a smaller particle on it. So those are some observations you can make about sand. Let's go ahead and add that to our jar. All right, our next substance is going to be gravel. Now this is gravel, it's small rocks, and you can see I've measured it out to what volume? That's right, 100 milliliters again is the volume of our gravel. And we're going to measure the mass now of it. And it is measuring 148. And for our observations, what is it, solid, liquid, or gas? And how big is each piece of gravel? They're right around maybe a centimeter, so 10 millimeters each. The size of a pea, maybe. So those are some observations you can write about gravel. The last thing we are putting in our jar after the gravel is water. Now I have measured out the water to be 100 milliliters again. Not this time. This time we have 200 milliliters. So make sure your volume for water is 200 milliliters. Let's go ahead and weigh it out. And they've written 204 grams. Now I don't have any water here on my piece of paper to measure out because the particles in water are so small you can't even see any individual particles. And what state of matter is water? Is it a solid, a liquid, or a gas? So you can write down those observations. Okay. Now we're going to add the water to our jar. And close it up. Now we have all these layers that we've put in there, but how would they settle naturally if we're not the ones that put those layers in there? In order to find out how they would settle naturally, we're going to mix up our jar. Give everything a chance to settle. Okay. Once we've let our jar settle a little bit, you can see that it's made some distinct layers. You can see the sand has settled to the very, very bottom layer, okay? Then next, it's hard to tell, but you can see a couple pieces. The gravel, although it mixed a little with the sand, is mostly sitting on top of the sand. There's a couple of pieces of the topsoil that were the smaller pieces that separated and ended up right there, but not a whole lot of it. Then this layer right here, if I move it around, you can tell, this is, even though it's dirty, this is water. This is our water layer. And then this, most of our topsoil ended up at the very top. So our layers are sand, gravel, water, topsoil. Now these separated by density, just like the substances in the center of the earth, also separate by density.